Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about how to find the circumference in the area of circles. So you probably talked about circles last year in 6th grade, but this year we're going to go a little bit further with them. But just to refresh our memories, let's talk about the difference between the radius of a circle and the diameter of a circle. So the radius of a circle actually is the distance from the center point to the side of a circle, where the diameter goes from one side to the other and right through the middle. So you can see on the diagram that the radius is always half of the diameter, or you can think of it as the diameter is 2 times the radius. So if you look at the first two examples that I gave you, in number 1, the 7.2 centimeters that you see there, that's considered the radius because it goes halfway through the circle. So we're going to call that 7.2 centimeters. To find the diameter, we would have to double that number because remember, the diameter goes the full way across. So if I take 7.2 and I multiply it by 2, I'm going to get that the diameter is 14.4 centimeters. In number 2, if you look at that circle, you can see that the diameter is 39 feet because it goes the full way across the circle, right through the middle. So to figure out the radius, I would have to take that number and divide it by 2. So 39 divided by 2 gives me 19.5. So our radius is 19.5 feet. So the reason why we went over that is because in order to find the circumference in the area of a circle, you actually have to know what the radius or the diameter are because that's part of the formula. So let's write over on the side here. There's actually 2 formulas that you can use for circumference. The first one is circumference equals pi times diameter. And the second one is circumference equals 2 times pi times the radius. So if you think about it, those 2 formulas are actually the exact same thing because 2 times the radius is the diameter. So really you can use either formula whenever you want. So if you look at the first example, you're going to see that we have a circle with a radius of 5 meters. So if I want to find the circumference of that circle, I'm going to start with the formula. And in this case, again, since I'm given the radius, I'm going to use the formula that has radius in it. So our next step after you write down the formula is your substitution step. Now if you noticed in the directions, it says right here to use pi equals 3.14. So when we're given that direction, we actually are going to put in 3.14 into our formula. So in that step that I just wrote, I'm keeping the 2 in the formula, I'm substituting 3.14 for pi, and I'm substituting 5 for my radius. So in your calculator, you're going to want to actually type in 2 times 3.14 times 5. And you should get that the circumference is 31.4 meters. Now remember, circumference of a circle is really the perimeter of a circle. It's the distance around the outside. So when we label it, it's just meters. It's not meters squared or meters cubed. It's just meters. So the next formula you need to know is for area, because if you go back to the directions, it's asking us to find both the circumference and the area. So over here on the side, I'm going to have you write this down. Area equals pi r squared. So there's only one formula for area. Sometimes people are confused and they try and do something like pi times d, thinking that r squared is the same as the diameter. It's not. So when you square a number, it's not the same as multiplying it by 2. So this is the only formula that you can use for area. So if we go back to the circle we were just working with, I'm going to start by writing down my formula. And then, again, again, we're going to use 3.14 for pi. And we're still going to have 5 for our radius. And so in your calculator, we should be typing in 3.14 times 5 squared. Now, if you forgot how to type in squared on your calculator, it's the x squared key. Or you can always just do 5 times 5. So after you type that in, you should get 78.5. And since this is area, our label is meters squared. So remember, area is what basically covers the circle. So think of circumference as the distance around the circle, and area is what covers the circle. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing with number 2. So in this circle, we have a diameter of 12 centimeters. So for my circumference formula, I'm just going to choose to use the one that has diameter in it, so pi times d. And for my substitution step, I'm still using 3.14 for pi times 12, which is my diameter. So if we type that in the calculator, we get 37.68 centimeters. Again, it's perimeter, so it's just centimeters. Okay, let's do the area. Remember, we only have one choice for our area formula. So even though I know the diameter, I can't use that in my formula. So I'm going to put in 3.14 for pi, but we have to figure out the radius. So remember, the radius is half of the diameter. So if the diameter is 12, our radius is 6. So I'm going to put in times 6 squared. So in your calculator, 3.14 times 6 squared gives us 113.04. And because it's area, our label is centimeters squared. Okay, so that's how you use your formulas for circumference and area. Now, we're going to keep going. We're going to do the same thing, but if you look at the next part, it says, find the circumference and area of each of the following, but to round your answer to the nearest hundredth. So when you see directions that say that, what it's really asking you to do is to use the pi key on your calculator. Okay, 3.14 is an approximation for pi, and sometimes we'll get a different answer when we use the longer version of pi. And your pi key on your calculator actually uses all of those decimals in pi to figure it out. And so when it says to round, that is kind of like code to use your pi key. So that's something that you have to know on your own. So the other thing is, when you go to do your formula, so I'm going to start with circumference. Again, I'll just choose to use 2 pi r since they gave me the circumference, or the radius, I'm sorry. When you're doing your substitution step and you're using the pi key, it's important that in your work you show the pi. Do not show 3.14 because you're not actually using 3.14. So we're going to leave it pi, and then we're going to substitute 0.3 in for our radius. So when you type this in your calculator, you're actually going to type 2 times your pi key, which you should see. Now, of course, I'm using a graphing calculator here at home, and so I'm forgetting where it is. There we go. So 2 times pi times 0.3. And I'm going to write this out for us. 1.88495, and so on. So if I had to round that to the nearest hundredth, remember I look at the hundredth place, and who's next door? It's a 4. So that tells me to keep it 1.88, and that is meters. Okay, so let's do the same thing for area. Area equals pi r squared. Again, we're using the pi key, so we want to leave pi in our work. And again, our radius is 0.3 squared. So in your calculator, we're going to do pi key times 0.3 squared. You're going to get 0.28274, and so on. So again, to the nearest hundredth, there's a 2 next door, so that tells me to keep it 0.28 meters squared. Okay, so let's do number 4, same directions. This time, instead of 2 pi r, I'm going to use pi d. So pi times 1.8, since that is our diameter. So in your calculator, pi times 1.8 is 5.6548, and so on. So to the nearest hundredth, we're going to keep it 5.65 feet. Okay, area is next. Area equals pi r squared. Remember, it's pi times, so if the diameter is 1.8, to figure out the radius, we have to do half of that. Half of 1.8 is 0.9, and I'm going to square. So in your calculator, we're going to do pi times 0.9 squared to get 2.5446, and so on. And rounding that is 2.54 feet squared. Okay, so we have one more way to do circumference and area, and this I think is going to be your favorite. If you look, the directions now say to leave your answer in terms of pi. Anytime you hear something say in terms of, what that means is that in your answer, you should have that thing. So a lot of times in algebra, you'll see something that says leave your answer in terms of x, which just means there should be an x in your answer. So when it says leave it in terms of pi, it means you should literally have a pi in your answer. So what this means is when I go to do my circumference for this first circle, and I see that there's a diameter there, I'm going to use pi d. Well, because it says to leave it in terms of pi, I'm going to leave pi as it is. I'm going to substitute in my 10.2 for my diameter, and that's it. You're not going to type anything in your calculator because you're going to leave the pi how it is. The only thing I'm going to have you do is to write this properly. Technically, in this case, pi is like a variable. And when we write our answers, the variables always go after the number. So I'm going to leave it as 10.2 pi inches. And I'm done. Same thing for the area. Pi r squared. So I'm going to leave the pi. If the diameter is 10.2, that means the radius is 5.1. So now the only thing you're going to type in your calculator is 5.1 squared, which is 26.01. Stick the pi on the end because you can't do anything with it, and put your label of inches squared, and you're done. All right, one more. For this one, I'm given the radius, so I'm just going to do 2 pi r. So this means I have 2 times pi times 8. And so the only thing we're going to do here is 2 times 8, which is 16. We put our pi on the end, and we label it. And that's it. For the area, I'm going to leave pi, and now I'm going to have 8 squared. And we know 8 squared is 64. Put your pi on the end, millimeters squared. So that's my favorite because it's really not a lot of work. Okay, last couple questions here are some word problems. So number 1 says, on June 8th, 1992, a crop circle with an 18-meter radius was found in a wheat field near I'm going to let you guys interpret how to say that, 43 miles southwest of Budapest. Find its circumference and use 3.14 for pi. Okay, so we know that this crop circle has an 18-meter radius. I'm finding the circumference, and I'm using 3.14 for pi. So those are kind of my important pieces of information I need. So why don't we use our 2 pi r formula. I'm putting 3.14 in for pi, 18 in for my radius, and then I'm going to multiply, and I'm going to get 113.04, and this is meters. Number 2, the largest tree in the world is the General Sherman sequoia in Sequoia National Park, California. It is 275 feet high, has a diameter of 36.5 feet, and has an estimated weight of 2,150 tons. Find the sequoia circumference to the nearest tenth of a foot and use 3.14 for pi. So there's a lot of extra information here, but let's pick out what we need. So we need to know the diameter. We need to know that we're finding the circumference. Now this is a little bit confusing because it says to the nearest tenth, but it also tells you to use 3.14. So what that means to me is that we're going to use 3.14 in our formula, but then that answer we're going to round to the nearest tenth. If it didn't say to use 3.14 for pi, we would have used the pi key because of that rounding direction there. Okay, so let's do, I'm going to do pi d for this one since I was given the diameter. I'm putting 3.14 in for pi, 36.5 in for the diameter, and I'm going to get 114.61, and this is feet. Wow, that's a big tree. Okay. Number 3, what is the area of the top of a circular manhole cover that has a radius of 30 centimeters? Use 3.14 for pi. Okay, so we know radius, we're trying to find the area, and we're using 3.14 for pi. Oops, not circumference. Area equals pi r squared. 3.14 for pi. 30 for the radius, and let's type that in. So I'm getting 2,826, and this is centimeters squared. Okay, last one. Victor needs to buy mulch for the garden with the dimensions shown in the figure. For how much area does Victor need to buy mulch? Round your answer to the nearest square yard. Okay, so if you look at the picture we have here, it's not a full circle. It's a half of a circle. So let's kind of go back. We know that we're finding the area. We know from the picture that the radius is 5.5 yards. So if you think about it, for the area of a circle, normally our formula is pi r squared. But since we're finding the area of half of a circle, we're going to divide it by 2. Okay, so whatever we get for our answer, we're going to divide by 2. Now, it says to round our answer, which means we're using our pi key, remember? That's important. So in my work, I'm also going to leave it pi. We said our radius was 5.5 divided by 2. So in your calculator, we're going to do pi times 5.5 squared, and then you're going to divide that answer by 2. And we're going to get 47.51658, and so on. But it says to the nearest square yard, so that implies that we went to the nearest whole number. So if I look here, because it's 0.5, I'm going to round that up to 48 yards squared. And that's it. So that is your lesson on area and circumference of a circle. So just to kind of recap, remember circumference is the same as the perimeter, which is the distance around the circle. And the area is how much space is inside the circle. So what needs, how much is needed to cover the circle is a good way to think of it. So one other way you can remember is with circumference and perimeter, it's like putting a fence around a yard, versus if it's area, it's almost like covering your yard with grass seed, let's say, or if you have a circular pool, putting a cover on your pool. So that's kind of a good way to distinguish between the two. And that's it.